He never raised his hand, never turned in homework, and never made eye contact with anyone. But every day, like clockwork, he'd walk into class, sit in the back row, pull his hoodie over his eyes, and fall asleep. The other teachers complained. The principal warned her. But Ms. Monroe, she never woke him up. She just let him sleep. She didn't know why. She didn't ask. Until one morning, two men in suits walked into her classroom. They showed her their badges and handed her a journal. On the first page, in small handwriting, it said, "Tell her thank you. She let me sleep when no one else did." This is Stories Unfolded. And today, we're telling the story of a teacher, a tired boy, and a moment of compassion that changed everything. Her name was Callie Monroe, or Ms. Monroe, as the kids called her. She taught 6th grade English in a school where hallway paint peeled from the walls and the library hadn't had new books since before her students were born. The school sat on the edge of a neighborhood most people only drove through. Lockers dented, fluorescent lights buzzing, textbooks with more duct tape than binding. But Ms. Monroe never complained. She had chosen this place, not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Callie had grown up just 5 blocks from that very school. She knew what it meant to go home to an empty fridge. She remembered what it felt like to sit in the back of a classroom, hoping no one called on her because she hadn't slept the night before. Not because she didn't care, but because her mom had worked the overnight shift, and she'd spent the night looking after her younger brother. So when she got her teaching degree, she didn't apply for the polished charter schools with high-tech whiteboards and PTO parents lining the halls. She came back here on purpose, because she knew what these kids carried, even when they didn't say it out loud. Her classroom was small, lit mostly by tired windows that never opened properly. The heat clanked in winter, the fans rattled in summer, but she made it warm. Not with money, but with presence. There was always a granola bar in her drawer, a spare hoodie on the back of her door, an extra pencil, even for the kid who'd already lost 3 that week. She taught grammar and essays and sentence structure, but what her students remembered most was how she made them feel. You're not a problem. You're not falling behind. You're surviving. You matter, even on the days you're tired. That's who she was. The kind of teacher who saw things others missed or ignored. So when Eli transferred into her class mid-year, she noticed him immediately. Not because he was loud, not because he was trouble, but because he was invisible, and he was trying really hard to stay that way. He wore the same gray hoodie every day, always kept the hood up, even when the classroom was warm, carried a beat-up backpack that hung too heavy for a kid his size, never raised his hand, never spoke unless spoken to. And every day, right after morning warm-up, he'd put his head down on the desk and fall asleep. The first time, she let it go. The second time, the other teachers started noticing. By the third, she was called into the principal's office. "We can't set a precedent, Callie," the principal said. "Letting kids sleep in class? He's got to learn discipline." She nodded, said she understood. But the next morning, when Eli put his head down again, she let him. Didn't tap his desk, didn't raise her voice, didn't say a word. She just kept teaching, like he was still listening. And in a way, maybe he was. At first, the other kids didn't pay much attention. They were used to classmates drifting in and out, kids who disappeared without warning or never returned after Christmas break. But Callie couldn't stop noticing. Eli flinched when someone dropped a book too loudly, jumped at the bell, checked the clock every few minutes like he was waiting for something, or someone, that never came. She started leaving a granola bar and juice box at his desk. He never said thank you. But one day, when he left class, she found a crumpled note tucked between the pages of a workbook. It was only one sentence. "Thank you for letting me sleep. That's the only place I feel safe." She kept the note, pinned it inside her desk drawer. Didn't tell anyone. Didn't send him to the counselor. Didn't file a report. She just kept letting him sleep. Because sometimes the most human thing you can do is nothing at all. It was a Wednesday. The morning started like any other. Late attendance, printer jam, one kid crying over a lost homework sheet, and another swearing he totally did it, but forgot to hit save. Ms. Monroe was halfway through a lesson on metaphor when the front office buzzed her room. "Can you step out into the hallway for a moment?" The voice didn't sound rushed, but it didn't sound casual either. She handed the class a reading packet and stepped outside. Two men stood waiting. Not in school lanyards, not in khakis and polos like most visitors. Suits, badges, government silence written all over their faces. The taller one spoke first. "Ms. Monroe, I'm Agent Lowell. This is Agent Kerr. We're with the FBI." She blinked, a moment of disorientation. Had something happened? Had one of her students? Agent Kerr stepped forward, holding a manila envelope. "This isn't about you. We're here because of one of your students." Her heart dropped. "Eli?" The agents didn't answer directly. Instead, they motioned toward an empty conference room. Inside, they sat across from her, placing the envelope carefully on the table between them. "What we're about to share isn't part of a criminal investigation against this child," Agent Lowell said gently. "But it is part of something much larger and much more serious." He slid the envelope across the table. Written on the front, in uneven handwriting, "For Ms. Monroe." Her name, in Eli's hand. Inside, wrapped in a layer of notebook paper and sealed with a strip of duct tape, was a small, battered composition journal. "We believe Eli witnessed a violent crime, one involving organized interstate trafficking, the kind you don't talk about on the evening news." Ms. Monroe stared down at the journal, heart pounding. "We've been tracking the case for almost a year, but what he wrote here filled in gaps we couldn't explain. Names, descriptions, places, patterns." They paused. "He never told anyone. Not the police. Not social services. Just you." She shook her head slowly. "He never told me anything." Agent Kerr nodded. Not out loud, but in here, he did. He tapped the journal. The agents told her Eli had been placed into federal protection. His whereabouts wouldn't be disclosed, for his safety and for hers. He wouldn't be returning to school. She felt the weight of that sentence settle in her chest like a stone. "He asked us to deliver this to you personally," Agent Lowell added, "and he asked that we read you the last page." He opened the final section of the notebook. His voice stayed even, but something in it shifted, just slightly, as he read, "I know I don't talk much. I know I sleep a lot in her class. But that was the only place I ever felt like a normal kid. She didn't wake me up. She didn't make me explain. She just let me be safe for a little while. Tell her I remember that." Ms. Monroe said nothing at first, not because she didn't have questions, but because she finally understood the one thing Eli had needed most: rest, and someone who didn't take it away. The agents stood to leave, Agent Kerr paused before exiting. "You may never hear from him again, but you should know. Your classroom saved a piece of him the world tried to take." And just like that, they were gone. Back in her classroom, the reading packets had been abandoned. Pencils rolling off desks, a few kids whispering, one drawing superheroes on the corner of a math worksheet. She walked to her desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled out the crumpled note Eli had left behind weeks earlier. "Thank you for letting me sleep." She folded it together with the final page of the journal, pinned them to the inside of her planner, then picked up where she left off, as if the world hadn't just shifted sideways. Because that's what teachers do. They carry the weight, and then they teach through it. Eli never came back. His desk remained empty for the rest of the semester. At first, students asked. A few whispered theories. One girl said she saw him get into a black SUV after school, but Ms. Monroe didn't offer an explanation. Not because she didn't care, but because some truths are too big for words. Instead, she cleared his desk, placed a book inside, one he had once quietly flipped through when he thought no one was watching. Then she closed it and didn't fill the seat again. She kept his journal in a locked drawer, never showed it to the class, never shared it in a training or posted about it online. But every time a new student put their head down, overwhelmed, exhausted, or just done with the day, she didn't wake them. She just adjusted the lights, lowered her voice, and taught the room around them. Because sometimes the most important lesson isn't about literature or grammar. Sometimes it's this: you're allowed to rest here. Years later, she still kept that page, Eli's note, pinned behind her desk calendar. Sometimes it curled at the edges. Sometimes she forgot it was even there. Until one afternoon, just before summer break, a different boy, quieter than most, raised his hand near the end of class. "Ms. Monroe?" She looked up. "Thanks for not asking too many questions." She smiled. "You don't always have to tell the whole story. Sometimes, just being here is enough." She never knew where Eli ended up, whether he grew tall, whether he was safe, whether he'd one day sit in another classroom and finally be able to stay awake through a full lesson. But she knew this. For a few weeks, in one quiet classroom with flickering lights and peeling walls, he found peace. And sometimes, peace is enough. We assume kids act out because they're lazy, that they sleep in class because they don't care. But sometimes sleep isn't avoidance, it's survival. And sometimes a teacher's smallest choice, to say nothing, to do nothing, becomes the loudest answer a child will ever remember. This was Stories Unfolded. Because not every hero stands at the front of the room. Some sit in the back, silently hoping someone lets them rest.